Hi there, everybody. Let's talk about story completion. It is Monday, Veterans Day, 11th of November. So happy Veterans Day to all you veterans type people out there. On to the subject of completing your stories. There's about 1,000 reasons why you're going to start something and might struggle with finishing it or just decide to stop. And I've run into this a couple times, and I've had a couple people mention similar issues. I know I'm not the only person dealing with this kind of stuff. Once you start the story, once you start making your book, once you start your writing process, what will end up happening is it's a long, drawn out process. And part of the reason I consistently say that you want to produce as many words as possible, you want to outline and plan your story ahead as far forward as possible, is because the process of crafting your words in your story, in your book, in your lead magazine, whatever you're producing, that process of producing that content is difficult. If you have to constantly keep going back and correcting errors and fixing things that you don't like and rewriting things that don't work, it's going to be discouraging. And that's the last thing you need when it's already a marathon. This is not a jaunt to the kitchen for a refrigerator. This when you're in the process of content creation for a book length piece of material, it's going to take a lot out of you. But the faster you can move it along, the better off you're going to be. Now, that said, your story completion, you're completing your work, can take some time, because what will end up happening is, with me, I'll get distracted by something, or I'll hit a part that I just don't know how I want to phrase. I'm writing the Neolithic historical fiction story that I was playing with a little bit ago. I know how I want to end. I know where I want it to go, but I'm stuck after a piece, okay? You've got these decision points all along the spectrum of your story. And this is a danger, because you can continue writing, you can pause it, or you can abandon it. At any point, you can abandon. And that may or may not be such a hot idea, because what ends up happening is, if you abandon your work, you've wasted that time. Practice is the only redeeming quality you're going to get out of it. That said, practice is important. I've got something like 3.5 million words of unpublished junk that has turned into practice. On the flip side, if you pause a story because you're dealing with a particularly complicated topic or portion of your work. I wrote a modern military science fiction kind of deal where basically alien entity touches humanity kind of thing. The science-y, fiction-y portion dealing with modern military portion, writing it was an emotional strain, because it was putting me back into places I don't need to be, where I should not be dwelling. The writing process was giving me violent nightmares, and then I had to take those nightmares and I had to write them out. And I was repeating the process, so it was putting me into a bad headspace, if that makes sense. I had to pause the story before I came back to it. I had originally planned like a 3 to 5 book series on it, but it was too difficult emotionally to write, because I'm going back to places, going back to really bad days. And those really bad days, so it was not a good thing. I paused that book during the writing process. I wrote a whole other book that was completely unrelated. I came back and finished the Symbiote book. Symbiote has a series of very brutal modern military engagements, combat, in your face kind of combat, modern combat. And it's not fun stuff, it's the brutal stuff. I had to pause in the middle of creating that modern military sci-fi nightmare so that I could write a whole nother book to get my head back to where I was healthy enough to finish the story. I'm not suggesting that you might have something as extreme as that happen to you, but if you hit a point where you're struggling with one aspect. Like, I know where I want to go next with my Neolithic story. I'm struggling with how to say it. That sounds odd, but I'm even struggling describing it in the outline form. Late last night, I took a period of time to start asking my pet AI questions about the scenes that I had to have conversations about, because each scene, and when you're crafting your story, each scene is going to connect like a string of kernels. Each scene should boost and support the following scenes with some additional piece of information, and that develops and moves along your story. Typically, I maintain perspective for a scene through a chapter is how I divide my scenes. I do not typically like to jump back and forth a TV script. I find that jarring and difficult to follow. When I write, I'll typically keep a unified perspective at minimum per chapter. Few books I've written maintain a single person perspective through the entire book. That seems to be the style that I prefer. Back to the point of completing your story. If you hit a struggling point in your writing, in your book, in your assembling your content for your book, you don't have to stop and suffer and beat your head against the keyboard. Do something else. If you're not on a deadline, obviously, you can set your project to side, work on something else that needs doing, and then go back. Let your brain work on your story while you are actively engaged with something else. Because if you just want to beat your head against your desk, you're probably not going to get the best results. If you relax, keep it in your head, go do something else, go work out, go for a walk, clean the kitchen, whatever. If you go and do something like that, sometimes you can come right back and you've reset and you just start writing again. That's a handy little trick, because sometimes it's just a tumbler in your head that's not clicking into place. You need to take the key out, walk away, let the tumbler settle, put the key back in, and twist that key again, that key representing an idea. You just need to let that system click back into place, and suddenly things start rolling. In my case, I have a Neolithic trade caravan with their donkeys, and they've got their trade goods. I'm walking up to a situation where I know what the region grows historically. This region grows cotton. We know it still grows cotton today. But as this trade caravan is moving through the wilderness with their trade goods, I'm struggling because I need to visualize what a village that produces linen woven cloth would require. I'm going back to doing research on it because I need the image in my head before I can describe it for the paper, and I don't have that image in my head. The pause, the break, may, for me, just need to be do my research, do a few errands, and with that research in my head, maybe I come back this afternoon and knock out the outline for this chapter, because I'm stuck on the outline, which is super frustrating. When you're putting your story together, when you're putting your book together, you may be stuck a section, have to abandon your story. You can place a pause in your story and then go back to it when your head is where it needs to be. Remember, when you're trying to keep your story moving along, trying to keep your book moving along, you can keep working, bang your head against your desk. So I guess that's a fourth option. You can pause your story, or you can abandon it. I don't recommend the abandoning because that's really discouraging. But you can pause your work and come back to it. And the pause can be as short as a day, an hour, and you can effectively get some good progress just by putting a refreshed idea into your head. I hope that helps somebody with completing their story. Have a happy Veterans Day, everybody.